welcome to this very timely panel event looking at the true cost of childcare. I'm Amy Allen, the Executive Director of the Financial Times charity FLIC, the Financial Literacy and Inclusion Campaign. Today FLIC, together with the FT's Women's Network and with the support of FT Live, have brought together the best informed experts and the most vociferous campaigners on behalf of mothers and caregivers in the UK. Now, you may have seen this week that FLIC's campaigning work to improve financial education has been featured in the FT, and we would love it if parents of secondary school-aged children could spread the word about our curriculum, which will equip all young people to navigate the complexities of the financial world, including this one. Now, this panel is timely as it follows this week's budget, where landmark reforms to the UK's childcare system were once again a key part of the Chancellor's speech, changing which families get what, how easily they can access it, and the support given to childcare providers which are so overstretched already. And it's also timely, falling on International Women's Day, which this year has the theme of Inspire Inclusion. And it's hard to think of a more important topic when it comes to inclusion than this. While women the world over disproportionately bear the brunt of the childcare burden, marginalised or minoritised women, particularly women of colour, LGBT+ women, those differently able and indeed solo parents, simply aren't afforded the same protections nor the equal freedoms to make the demands of their employers that can make all the difference. So I, for one, am really looking forward to hearing our panellists offer not just their explanation of where the UK is right now, but sharing their ideas and solutions for a more equitable future. Now it's time for me to hand you over to the wonderful Claire Barrett, FLIC trustee and the FT's consumer editor and host of Money Clinic podcast, who will be guiding you through this 1-hour discussion and Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello and welcome. Wherever you're celebrating International Women's Day, we're glad that you chose to have lunch with the FT and learn about the true cost of childcare. I'm Claire Barrett, and today I'm joined in the FT's London studio by 3 incredible campaigners whose supporters number hundreds of thousands of women from all walks of life. Starting with Joely Brearley, who founded the charity Pregnant Then Screwed in 2015 after her own experiences of pregnancy discrimination. Anna Whitehouse, the writer and broadcaster better known online as Mother Pucker, who started the #FlexAppeal movement campaigning for flexible working for all. And Micah Curry, the former Investors Chronicle journalist who started the Financially Fearless campaign at Hargreaves Lansdown to get more women investing. We're going to hear from them about why better childcare and more flexible workplaces matter not just for women and families, but for everyone, and how the changes that they've been campaigning for will help to close the gender pay and pension gaps. So thank you to everyone who pre-submitted questions for me to put to the panel. We'll get through as many of these as possible, but please be aware our answers are not intended as financial advice or an investment recommendation. You need to do your own research for that. So let's start by talking about the other big event this week, the UK budget. Joely, let's start with you. What was in it for women?
There were a couple of things. I mean, nothing groundbreaking, but the first thing was a child benefit, which we know has now increased from a £50,000 threshold to £60,000 threshold. So if you're earning £60,000, you can access the full entitlement of child benefit. And then it tapers up to £80,000.
That's right. And that's from April. So that's quite a quick change.
Yeah, which is great. And we've had it at £50,000 for years and years now. So it's about time it increased. What we really need to see is that based on household income rather than individual income, because it disproportionately impacts single parents if it's based on an individual income. And we potentially won't see that till 2026, but at least there is a commitment now to look at it. The second thing we saw is that fees, so the government pays hourly rates to childcare providers for the funded hour schemes. And historically what was happening was when there were increases to national living wage and inflation, those fees weren't increasing. And of course that left childcare providers in a complete mess because they suddenly had to find a load of money. What the government guaranteed in the budget was that they would index those that funding to national living wage and to inflation. So that gives providers some stability and ability to be able to plan, which is good for parents and good for children.
It certainly is. Well, we'll come back to that in more detail later, but some analysis by the Women's Budget Group that's been done this week about those tax cuts in the budget has found out that actually women will benefit less from what's happening. They think the average single woman would gain just £279 from the latest tax cuts against £346 for a single man. But the average lone mother would gain just £85 according to their calculations. And that's largely because this group often struggle to access work and can get trapped in low paid jobs. Now, that has been reflected in questions that we've had in from the audience saying, what about childcare for low paid women? These reforms to child benefit, they're very welcome, but they are going to affect families that are bringing home quite a lot of bacon. What about people who do night shifts, early morning hours? We're mainly from disadvantaged communities where mothers working is a necessity for family survival, says one person. And a similar one, the UK has one of the most expensive childcare systems in the world. How can a woman on the minimum wage afford to pay these costs? JD, a bit of reaction from you to that.
I mean, well, the simple answer is that they can't.
Mm.
The childcare system does not work for families on low income, and the way that the benefit scheme works, it skews towards middle income families up until a rate of £100,000. If you're on a low income, the percentage of your income that you spend on childcare is, you know, up to 80% of your income for some families. So of course the majority of low income families don't actually use our childcare system because they can't afford to. They tend to rely on family and friends. That can trap them in a cycle of poverty, because if you don't have childcare, it means that you're not able to work, or you have to work fewer hours, and so you're not able to bring in more income. So we think the whole system needs scrapping, and you need to start from the beginning. We need one simple system that makes sense to everybody and that really does benefit low income families, who ultimately will benefit the most from an affordable, high quality childcare system.
Anna.
It's I said this to Jolie the other day. It's a little bit like the government went, right, we're going to build a motorway, the M25, get on the road, off you go, everybody, all equal. And it's like certain people at certain stages realise that the road hasn't actually been finished. So you might have a motorway, but you can't get anywhere. And I think low-income families suffer hugely, like Jolie said. You know, we'll get on to obviously the flexible side of that, but it's just been painful, I think, to see those. I mean, we can't deny there's 4 privileged white women sitting here talking about this issue, but that doesn't mean we don't understand and see and hear daily from the underbelly of this issue, where if you don't have a grandparent, granny daycare, like Jolie said, what other option is? There's no other option care. It's not a case of there's fallback. You fall through the cracks. So yeah, it's a system set up absolutely systemically to fail women, but ultimately those on low income and from low income backgrounds.
And I mean, Michael, I'll bring you in here. There is a big element within this socio-economic issue with childcare with race. Let's talk a little bit about the ethnicity wealth gap, some people are calling it, because this is affecting women in all kinds of different ways, childcare being just one.
Absolutely. And what we do know, the long-term price that women pay because of the debilitating cost of childcare, and because childcare is so unaffordable, is the motherhood penalty. The fact that having children is the biggest financial blow that women will suffer in their lifetimes, to their chances of a promotion, to their chances of a pay rise, and crucially, to their pension. Now, the research shows that the motherhood penalty is amplified for Black women and women of minorities, because we know there's an ethnicity wealth gap, much like the gender pay gap. And it makes it really difficult for those women to get back into the workforce after having a baby, to increase their working hours. And the price is most crucially paid when it comes to our pensions. Our pensions are a key vehicle to our long-term financial resilience. And really where the gap kicks in between what women have in their pensions and what men have is during the childbearing years. And then it just grows and grows and grows. And by the time women retire, they have more than £100,000 less in their pension pots than men. And it's impossible to close that gap. And that's why today, single women are the highest percentage of the population who are pensioners in poverty. That is the long-term price women pay for doing the right thing by their children, by their families, by taking a career break because childcare is not affordable, but they end up with a lot less in their pensions.
Because we don't value care,
No.
the care that women are providing for free. I've written about this in the FT today. Women are 4 times more likely to retire early, for example, to look after a family member. Now, that could be their elderly parents or parents-in-law, it could be grandchildren, but it's the women all the time
Hasn't there been
who are filling the gap.
Hasn't there been a summary of what women would earn every year for parenting? You know, the nannying and the ferrying and the form filling and the administration around it all. And I think it's, you know, it's bigger than banker jobs if you actually tot it all up. It's like you say, we don't value primary caring.
Now, I just want to spend time answering a question that's come in from the audience about how the motherhood penalty affects not just racially minoritized women, but also disabled women and women who have children with disabilities, send children. Now, Anna, I know this is something that you've been campaigning about very recently.
Yes, so my close friend had 2 babies, twins, born with life-limiting disabilities. And the first thing was told to her in the hospital was, you are going to have to step back from your career. There's no other way of making this work with 2 SEN babies, even 1. And I think these SEN parents, parents with children with disabilities, are falling through the cracks as those on lower incomes are. You know, it's almost this hidden, I think it's almost underwater screaming you hear, where yes, there's women like me shouting and being heard, but those who are actually being punished more for doing more are not being heard. And so, yeah, we've been really trying to amplify the voices of those with SEN babies, those who need more flexibility, but also really specific, as Jolie's been fighting for, really specific childcare needs. You know, it's a very different system set up for those with SEN children. So, yeah, there's a hell of a lot more to do.
We want to see a change to the Equality Act on this, because at the moment in the Equality Act, you have a legal right to reasonable adjustments if you have a disability.
If you, the worker,
If you have a disability, but you don't have any right to reasonable adjustments if you have a dependent with a disability. So it's actually a really easy tweak we can make to the Equality Act. We've written up the legislation. All we need is for political parties to adopt it. And what we know is happening to particularly mothers with children with special educational needs is they're going into work, and of course they have to go to various appointments, take their children to various appointments, and it's hard, you know, it's really hard work looking after a child with a disability, and their employers are just not making the adjustments they need, so they're having to leave their job. So the motherhood penalty for mothers with disabled children is vast compared to mothers without a disabled child.
Micah?
Well, I would agree with that. And I think there is no structure in place to support those women. And really, what we need to do is look at this holistically, because if we talk about investing, if we talking about money, we never think that that will happen to us, right? And we don't have the infrastructure in place as a country, but also talking about it, as Anna mentioned, those women are often lost on the periphery of society.
Repeatedly failed by different systems. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about those childcare reforms that were the centrepiece of the budget 1 year ago, updated this year. The first stage of the rollout starts in just a few weeks for parents who can now access those extra so-called free hours. But Jolie, how's this going? What are your members telling you?
There have been various problems along the way, partly because this has just been pushed out so quickly. That the
It's
system
great that
sort
it's
of hasn't.
happened.
Yeah, and of course, you know, parents were desperate for it. So even though we feel it's been pushed out quite quickly, there's still been a lot of parents left behind. Initially, there were issues with the codes, so people weren't getting their codes in time to be able to access the funded hours. That seems to have mostly smoothed over now. The majority of parents have their codes, but what parents didn't expect is that other costs would increase. So they expected to get these 15 funded hours a week. It's term time only, so it actually works out 11 funded hours per week. But what we're seeing are the other costs are increasing. So costs outside of those funded hours have increased quite considerably in order to make up this shortfall, because the funding is not enough to cover the cost to deliver
So this
those
isn't the
places.
providers profiteering.
No, no.
This is them just trying to cover yet another gap, the nursery funding gap.
The Women's
we call
Budget
it.
Group estimates the gap is £5 billion.
Mm.
So it would, in order for the government to fund it properly to deliver those places, there'd be an additional £5 billion needed in the system. So you can see that for each provider, they're making up quite a shortfall, and they need to find innovative ways to do that.
And we had a question in about this from an audience member who's saying it's so apparent going to different childcare providers. I think she's pregnant and looking for a nursery place, because of course people have to start so early because there are so few places available. Trying to gauge how one provider might structure its costs and add on fees, and how another provider might, because everyone is different. It's really hard for women to navigate.
It's really complicated, and some providers are saying that you can only use a certain amount of hours per week. Other providers are saying you have to use the 15 funded hours that week. They're doing what they can in order to make childcare as affordable without their business closing. So,
And goodness knows, plenty of childcare businesses have closed.
We've lost so many over the last 3 years in particular. We've lost providers and places. We've hemorrhaged them, and it's all because of these pressures that have been placed on them to deliver these funded places, but they're just not being given the money that they need to make it work.
Now, Anna, it's been a really big week for you too. International Women's Day, the budget, and Flex appeal in Parliament. Tell us more about that.
I opened my speech at Parliament with the fact that there are just so many gaps. I'm exhausted by the gaps. You know, you've got the pleasure gap, you've got the pensions gap, you've got the gender pay gap, the nursery gap. It's like there's like glaring holes of inequality everywhere.
What's the pleasure gap? I clearly must fall into it.
It's a link to the gender pay gap. It's all linked. But yes, have continued to campaign. But as obviously Jolie and I work very much different sides of the same discrimination coin, I would say. You know, there's really the drive for legislative change, obviously on flexible working and childcare from Jolie. And from my side, it has been really, to be honest, just seeing the words flexible working in bill is something I didn't expect to see starting out on this, but it is utterly toothless, the current legislation. It's really no different to where we were before, other than you can ask from day one for flexible working other than after 26 weeks. So
employers can still say no.
And they can still say what the onus is on the employee still, not the employer, you know. And I think the list of business reasons, really loose business reasons, where an employer can quite whimsically say no to somebody is wide open. And so it is, the words flexible working bill are there. Will it do anything on the 4th of April? No. There is a hell of a lot more to do, and that is something Jay and I have, obviously we talk a lot, we work a lot together on this. Is there is so much change that's needed on the nuts, the bolts, the waterproofing of this bill to make it even vaguely effective for those that need it. And it doesn't even cover, like we talked about, shift workers, you know, we talked about lower income families, single parents. They are not just falling through the gaps, they're not even there on the cliff edge, you know. It's it's unfortunately still really lacking any punch. So that was my main point in Parliament, that there's still a long way to go, and that road we are continuing to travel and pave, you know, for our girls.
Now, the politicians are listening, and that's good.
Are they?
The business leaders, well, they could listen more. they could listen more. But business leaders, different kettle of fish. Now, Micah, I'm going to bring you in here briefly before we cover some of the unfortunate news events of this week, with flexibility being eroded. But make the business case for business leaders who are watching this webinar about why flexible working is important for businesses and helping all of their staff, not just women, to thrive.
Claire, the business case is very simple. Women are a force for economic growth. So you spoke about the budget earlier, the announcements that the Chancellor made, and there were a lot of announcements there about fueling the UK stock market. We know the UK stock market has been struggling, domestic companies have been struggling, and he announced a British ISA to encourage people to invest in the UK. Now, what the Chancellor needs to do, he doesn't need to look any further than the US. For 2 years, people have been worried about the US slipping into recession.
Correct.
The US hasn't slipped into
No.
recession. The UK has. And the reason why the US hasn't slipped into recession is because of women. Women in the workforce. So this is not something I've made up. This is the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, has noted, the one thing that stood out is the strength of the US jobs market. Strength of the US jobs market has been because post-COVID, where flexibility has become more entrenched, there are more women working. So they've made some changes to their child credit, which is the equivalent of the UK's child benefit. So they've improved that. But the overwhelming force has been the fact that women are making the most of flexible working. They're coming back to the workforce. They are propping up the US economy. When women do work, they are more educated and they're more productive. So they are fueling that. And it's not just about women working, it's also about women spending. We know that women are set to inherit 60% of wealth over the next few years, really, and that women are a growing force of economic wealth. Women are increasingly the main breadwinners. And what's happened in the US is with things like what they call the feminization of wealth, the Barbie movie, Taylor Swift's concerts, propping up cities across the US where women are going with their daughters.
Boosting
Beyonce
inflation.
is a renaissance tour. Women going to those cities, spending money, whether it's nail bars, whether it's hotels. They propped up the economy to the fact now that economists in Australia, Canada, all over the world are looking at the impact of Taylor Swift's concerts on the economy because women are going and spending. In the Southeast Asian economies, they've been really annoyed because Singapore has managed to get all of Taylor Swift's concerts right there because they know women spending money fuels the economy. Now, women can't spend money if they don't have childcare in place, if they don't have that infrastructure in place, which enables them to keep earning and to keep a foot in the door.
Well, Swiftonomics.
There we go.
You heard it here first for the FT's International Women's Day seminar. Now, we could, Anna, talk about some of the negative headlines. Companies like Boots have been in the news this week for rowing back on flexible working, saying they want everyone back in the office. They're not the only ones. But I would rather give voice to some positive examples of companies who are saying, no, we're actually going to embrace flexibility because it is going to bring us greater prosperity, as Micah was saying. Tell us about what you've been finding out.
So following on from what Micah said, so we did the first ever economic report of its kind called Flexonomics.
Which is staggering in itself that it's the first of its kind.
Well, we just realised that, yes, we can say, look, we're burnt out, we want to work more, economy let us in, but actually businesses needed the cold hard cash, the figures on the table to understand the business reasons for doing it. And we found in that report, which was done with Sir Robert McAlpine, the construction firm, that there would be a £55 billion boost to the UK economy if flexible working was effectively taken on by all businesses. So to follow up on that point, it's not just hot air, it's cold hard cash for businesses. So I would say initially, McAlpine's a really good example. They haven't got it perfect, and I'm not going to say any company's got it perfect.
No.
We're in transition. There are holes everywhere, all over the place, but there's those with the right mindset. We've got the legislative change that we need, which is the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to change, but the cultural change is what I am looking at. Those that aren't waiting to be sort of hit into action are actually taking action. And with McAlpine, they got on board with this campaign because they're like, actually, to facilitate this on an economic level, it's not just about women. It's not about mothers. It's about our construction workers who need flexible working. It's about the men in our industry stepping up and not seeing it as emasculating, caring for their own children. It's the bosses facilitating flexible working requests so that 1 in 10, I think, goes through for men. 4 in 10 goes through for women at the moment. The burden of childcare is still on our shoulders. I would say, look, there are no watertight examples, but I do love these little flickers of hope, which is companies like Deloitte, for example, publish almost like top trump cards of flexibility within their organization. So we've got this day one right. What they're doing is giving transparency to the flexibility within their companies. So, it could be Alan works 3 days and does community service 2 days. I then coming into that HR department maybe would say, I've seen on your website, this is how it could work. I'd like to work like that.
So it gives women and men the confidence at job interview stage.
Yeah, that you're not feeling
that's how I'd
like
to work.
it's a bonus ball or a nice to have, or, you know, craft beer tap in reception. It's fundamental working rights and needs. And I think, you know, that's one example, and there are many of those. But no, there isn't one company getting it right, I'm afraid. But there's hope and optimism amongst all of that in Flickers.
I mean, one small change that the FT's made is saying on all of our job vacancies, this role is available flexi and part-time, because I think one of the biggest problems in the gender pay gap is that we have a lot of women who are working part-time who've cut their hours, and the side effect of that is that they never leave that role or go for a promotion because they're almost grateful to have the arrangement sorted out. And I think that flexible working coming in, I've seen it with my own colleagues, my own friends, is really starting to break the boundaries of people feeling like they have to stay in one job, because of course job hopping, moving companies, that's the quickest way that you can put up your pay. It's yet another factor.
We are going backwards. I mean, you know, we saw Boots this week going back to a 5-day working week in the embers of COVID, where, you know, if you didn't zoom in and log on and work flexibly, you'd quite simply have to shut down. So I think there is, unfortunately, a backwards move, and I think it is for all of us to move that cultural shift forward. I realise you had something to say because you gave a
We
look.
rudely cut across you.
I was just going to say the good thing that we're seeing is lots of companies moving to a 4-day working week, and I think that is really positive, and trialing this and showing that it's really successful, that it actually improves productivity and it improves well-being, and sometimes it boosts the bottom line. So the trials that are going on across the UK that are demonstrating its effectiveness, I think hopefully will pay dividends in a few years' time.
Micah, what would you add to all of this? The business community needs to get behind this.
Well, I think it's also retention. You retain women if you give them that flexibility, and men. And I think we spoke earlier about the gaps, the many gaps, and the gender pension gap being that big gap that women end up paying. And women outlive men. In the UK, there are 15,000 people over the age of 100. Of those 15,000, more than 12,000 are women. But if we drill into the gender pension gap and we say, what is the driving force behind that gap? Is it because women don't participate in pensions? No. Is it because women save less in pensions? No. Is it because of the gender pay gap? It's not even because of the gender pay gap. The overwhelming force, the biggest driver, is because women take career breaks. Women go part-time because they want to raise children, or because of the good daughter penalty, which is something we haven't spoken about.
But good daughter penalty.
Good daughter penalty. So women are far more likely to be the ones to take a career break to look after sick or elderly relatives. We know we've got a massive problem across the world with dementia, aging population, and it's women who take that break because they need to look after their parents, but they end up paying the price over the long term. And in the UK today, we've got over 1 million sandwich carers, which is really women looking after elderly parents and adult children at the same time, really at the time when they should be very focused on their pension and turbocharging their pension to ensure their financial resilience for the long term. But it is the motherhood penalty, it is the good daughter penalty, and of course it's the thorny issue of the gender pay gap.
Now, I'm going to change tack here slightly. We've been talking about older women, older people, their experiences, problem of dementia, social care. But now I want to talk about younger people, younger women in particular, because I know this is something that Jolie is very keen to talk about. Now, we've had a question here from an audience member who says, what advice would you all give a young couple who want to start a family but are worried about the cost and the challenges of childcare? Now, you've got lots of young members in Pregnant and Screwed. What's your feeling about all of this?
I mean, if you're a young mum, so if you're under the age of 25, you are 7 times more likely to lose your job if you have a baby, which is absolutely devastating statistics, because then once you've lost your job, again, you end up in a cycle of poverty, because then you have a child. It's really hard to get back into the workplace. You end up living on benefits. The numbers of young mums who skip meals so that they can put food on the table is astronomical, and the number of young mums in poverty is just, you know, devastating. So if you are a young mum when you have a baby, I mean, I would love to be able to give some really positive advice, but it's kind of hard because you're much less likely to be able to get flexible working. It's quite unlikely you're going to be able to afford childcare. If you're a student, you don't get access to any childcare benefits at all. Students are ineligible for the funded hours and
That's a black hole.
ineligible for tax-free childcare. So we've been calling on the government to extend that eligibility criteria so that it includes students and anybody in training, because it doesn't include nurses, for example. So
We
we're
need
losing
more
nurses
nurses.
from the system. So the whole system is currently set up so that it really does crush young couples. But we are hopeful that this is now on the table with the government and with other political parties.
Well, yes, because we
And
might not have the same government for much longer.
we may not, come the end of the year, we may have an entirely different government. And they are now talking about this issue. And so we hope that eligibility criteria will extend.
Anna, for younger people asking for flexible working, I think there are lots of different workplace surveys that show us that maybe young people want it more than older people. What would your advice be to this audience member, a young person who wants to start a family but's worried about the challenges?
I mean, I think Jolie has spoken very clearly in the sense that, I think, unfortunately, be warned. Right now, the working world isn't set up for those who are established in their careers and are financially stable, let alone those at the beginning of your career. But I think there is a new wave of Gen Z that is coming through and fighting for a different way of working. Like, talent is ebbing and flowing more freely at the moment between companies.
Your post on
Oh,
Instagram the other
I
day.
know, I love that. And I think that's one thing I'd like to say to any big businesses here is the minute that you enforce, let's say, like Boots, a 5-day working week from hybrid flexible working, just be warned that talent recruiters are going to be honing in on that talent. It's a cost. I think it costs a mid-level employee, it costs about 30 grand to replace somebody. It's a huge cost to businesses replacing talent. So let the talent, I think, lead. And I think this young couple, for example, I think there's a strength in leading with your feet. I know that's easier said than done when you have got pregnant and then got screwed, unfortunately. But yes, I think we are seeing a new world. And I think Lego is a really good example Lego is a really good example of how they are restructuring just their office space to fit with this new Gen Z. Like, we do not want to be chained to the office. We're good at our jobs. Let us work, here, there, and everywhere. And they have 3 floors. One is creative, one is social, and one is silent. And so nobody knows where anyone is. You're just getting on with your job. There's no ownership. So I think we are seeing, like, bricks and mortar changing around this issue, as well as those who are younger voting with their feet.
Wow. Well, Micah, we all know where the silent floor is in the Financial Times office, don't we? It's the Investors Chronicle where we both used to work. They're all very head down, looking at their research reports there. But I mean, talking about young people more broadly and advice that we can give them if they're in their first job, second job. I mean, one question that I tell people you must always ask at job interview level is, what is the level of match on offer in the company pension? Because that's something that could be great at one company and appalling in another. Of course, the younger you start putting money into savings or pensions, the longer that money has got to build. And another one is, what's the parental leave policy? Now, I think it would be fantastic if companies could make this information public so that we wouldn't have the onus of asking and being marked out as a potential person who might suddenly disappear and have a baby in the future, because also flexible working, parental leave, it's a question men should be asking too.
Definitely. And I think, when we look at jobs, so my advice to a younger generation would be, when you've got 2 job offers, or when you're going out and deciding how you want to navigate your career, don't just focus on the salary. Don't just focus on the commute. Don't focus on the gym membership and the perks. Focus on the pension. Look at how much the matching is from the employer, because that in essence is free money. So debate that, make the most of that, and look at the parental leave too, because really, and also when you're going on maternity leave, this is a key thing that a lot of women think, I'm going on maternity leave, I've got to keep hold to every penny, I'm going to stop my pension contributions, which is the worst possible thing you can do, because even as your pay falls while you're on maternity leave, and this is something I wish I knew when I went on maternity leave twice, is if you maintain your pension contributions, even if your pay falls, and even if you have an extended maternity leave, your employer must maintain those contributions from them. So the pension is really important. But I also think for too long, the narrative around women having children has been negative. There's been a lot of talk about, why don't women invest? Why do women earn less? Why do women have a gender pension gap? And we talk about the hurdles and the barriers. We do need to move the dial on and talk about the enablers. What are the things we can do? What are the things that are within our gift, within our power? And the biggest thing is financial planning, talking about money. If you're taking a career break, getting your partner to put money into your pension, all those little bits, looking at those and really talking about money and taking hold of financial planning. It's the thing that we leave last. Like, women have this innate ability to put everyone's needs ahead of their own. And we are sorting everything out. We're running the household, but we're never thinking about our long-term financial resilience and well-being.
Well said there, Micah. Now, I've got a question here from Faith Rutto. Faith, hello, if you're watching, thanks for your question. She is an executive coach and a huge advocate of flexible working. Now, her question is, how can companies better support parents, not just women, through the different stages of parenthood? I mean, some of our earlier conversation reflected the fact that mothers, fathers have different needs, children, send children especially, much more requirement there for flexibility. Anna, what's your thoughts on this?
I think the working world is not set up on any level for female biology, from periods right the way through to the menopause. It's a man's world. The 9 to 5 was born in the Industrial Revolution when men went and earned the bacon and women cooked it. And we're still really existing in the shell of that structure, fighting out of it, screaming underwater for it to change. But it's still fundamentally, we're in that sort of vice-like grip of an archaic system. I think the way forward with this is, from my side, is flexible working definitely needs to be retained by those at the top as an important element. So we've had, I think, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, they had their Working Forward pledge, which companies sign up to. And I think that transparency is needed. We've got Ford on there, Pets at Home, a real variety of businesses that have utterly signed up to changing things within sort of the flexible working discussion.
We've got some training that we're doing at the moment,
Ooh,
which
tell us more.
is free to smaller organisations, that is about reproductive health in the workplace. So it's about fertility treatment, pregnancy loss, because most companies don't have policies for what happens if you need to go through fertility treatment or if you lose a baby. It's just oh, well, have a couple of days off and back to work and carry on as normal. But we need to make sure that parents are not just looked after through pregnancy and maternity leave, but also through that process of trying to start a family as well, to really get this right. But there's also things you can do, like carers leave. We have a policy at Pregnant and Screwed, and we're just a tiny charity where you have 5 paid days of dependence leave. So if your child is starting school that day, or if your child is sick, then you can have 5 days off additional just to do what you need to do at home.
And there's like slight punctuation points in all this on a very basic level. When someone goes off on maternity leave, don't lead with, well, she's probably not coming back. Keep her seat warm. When someone goes to a 20-week scan, don't make usherings about her, taking time off in the office. When a woman comes back from maternity leave, lean into her, the separation anxiety, the postnatal depression, and buddy her up with somebody else within the company who's just been through it, maybe. I think it's that sort of more empathetic approach to not just female biology in the workplace, but leading with EQ as well as IQ, which is something Accenture is doing now in terms of employing managers. We need managers who empathise with this working world is not set up for women.
Micah?
Yeah, I think it's a key point, punctuation points. And to me, one of the biggest punctuation points is returning from maternity leave. That is when a woman is feeling really vulnerable. Her whole world has changed. You go back to work, you've changed, but work hasn't changed. And really wrapping your arms around those employees when they come back. What can I do to make it easier for you? What flexibility can I introduce? What support can I introduce? Because that's also the point where we lose women. They come back and they struggle to make it work and they leave the workforce. And with technology moving as fast as it is, they struggle to re-enter. Now, there are lots of good returner programs that are bringing women back into corporates and companies who've been out of the workforce for a number of years, but that is still very isolated and not enough. There's not enough volume there. But returning from maternity leave is such a key point. And if we can really have programs in place where we are giving women the support they need, and also men giving them the support they need too, we can retain that talent in the workforce.
Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about shared parental leave. Now, I'm proud to say that lots of my colleagues upstairs at the Financial Times are making use of shared parental leave, but the statistics show us that it's not been the most popular of policies, yet when people do it, it has great effects. Tell us more.
I mean, it's failed on every measure the government has set. It's not shared parental leave, it's shared maternity leave. It requires a mother to give away a portion of her leave to a father or the second parent in order to use it. And of course, most mothers don't want to do that. They want to keep it to themselves. And we know that if you segment it out, so you give dads ring fence leave paid at a decent percent of salary, then the uptake is it jumps massively. So, you know, if you look at Quebec compared to the rest of Canada, Quebec gives ring-fenced paternity leave. It's paid at a decent amount of salary. The uptake is about 80%.
80%.
Compared to the rest of Canada, where it's about 12%.
Where are we
Goodness.
at?
With the uptake
2%.
of shared parental leave is 2%, yeah,
Oh
of
my
eligible parents. So today, in fact, there is new legislation that's been laid that splits paternity leave. So currently you have to take 2 weeks paternity leave in one block. The radical change the government has made to fix paternity leave is to allow you to take that 2 weeks in 2 1-week blocks. It's obviously not going to make any difference to anybody. It really does not change the dial on paternity leave. And we did some research with the Centre for Progressive Policy that found that if you ring fence paternity leave of 6 weeks, 90% of salary, we would close the gender pay gap by 4%. So this is a key to unlocking women's equality, as well as giving dads, you know, dads are parents too. They want to spend time with their kids. And we know that it's really good for them. It's really good for children. It's really good for families. And 18% of Brits think 2 weeks paternity leave is not enough. So the public want this as well. It's an open goal for
And there's
government.
so much conscious bias at the top of that assumption of childcare being on our shoulders. I've said this many times with Jolie, but it still sits with me that this one dad asked for flexibility in his job to pick up his daughter on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And his boss just said, well, you know, can't your missus do that?
Yeah.
And you know, his missus was a brain surgeon. And he was like, well, you know, you pick a lane. I'm in recruitment. She's saving lives. Not that you need to be at the top of the medical profession to be afforded flexible working, but there's still
It's the mindset.
it's the mindset. And I think there is nothing more masculine than raising your own child. And I think there's a whole swathe of dads quietly and need to be loudly like owning paternity leave when it's set up for them to succeed, but owning that want, desire, need to work flexibly for their own children, their own families. It is not emasculating.
Well, we've had lots of different questions from the audience about this. It always surprises me how few men in the UK take up shared parental leave or even make use of their company's paternity benefits. And of course, just like with women, what companies will offer men, privately run companies, is vastly different. Unless you ask, unless companies tell us, we don't know that. A related question here: how can we encourage greater gender equality in childcare responsibilities within families? Building on from what you were saying, Anna. Micah, you're smiling at me.
Well, it's interesting because we've just done a lot of research on this at Hargreaves Lansdowne, looking at what the enablers are. So as I mentioned, there's so much research about what the barriers are, what the hurdles are, what are the enablers.
Yeah, the
And
positive
the
things.
positive things. And what we are seeing is a generational shift. There's a massive generational shift where those gendered norms that are based in the dark ages really are shifting. And increasingly, young women are sharing the load, and they are the main breadwinners. You know, women are earning money and they're still embarrassed to say, you know, I'm earning money and my other half, my partner, is taking care of the childcare. And we do need to move the dial there to accept that. There's nothing wrong with that, you know, it's not emasculating, it's actually so empowering. And really, if we can move that and we can look at the enablers and we can have those role models. I often talk about having more role models in finance and having more role models as investors when we talk about any industry. If we talk about, you know, we spoke about Taylor Swift, but if we talk about science, technology, all of those industries, you can get a role model who's a woman. Give me a role model who's the female Warren Buffett. Where are the female investors who are household names, who normalize investing? Because investing is the way to grow your wealth over the long term. That is the way to move the dial. And women are diligent savers. We know that women save with a goal in mind. They squirrel money away in cash, but they don't invest because we need role models and we need to talk about the enablers.
Well, Dragon's Den. That's the one I would say. I was watching that last night with some cracking deals being done by Deborah Meaden in that. Now, let's cast our gaze a little bit wider now. It is International Women's Day after all, and this is a great question from somebody in the audience who says, are there any innovative approaches or models of childcare provision in other countries that the panel believe could be beneficial if implemented in the UK? Who wants to come in first on that one?
I mean, pretty much every other country is doing better than we are, but there is no perfect model. Every country that has a good model, there are the sides of it that are lacking, shall we say. So for example, in Canada, they have a $10 a day childcare system, and we've seen that that's massively increased maternal employment, but the quality is very low. So in terms of the benefits for children, it's not great. What we have been looking at, and we've been working with the New Economics Foundation on remodelling our current system, we would like to see childcare cost no more than 5% of household income, so based on household income rather than individual income. And we think that that is not only affordable within the amount of money that we've got, but it's a much simpler system for families to be able to access. Currently, we have 8 different benefit systems, 8. So you suddenly go into childcare, and it's just a minefield. Nobody has any idea what they can access.
And you have, a small human to care for.
Exactly, yeah. So you're pretty
time.
busy while you're trying to navigate all of this. And with that, we want to see an increase in funding to providers so that they can provide really high quality care, because childcare professionals, we know, are paid so badly that many of them are even using food banks. They're in a complete mess. The pay is just so appalling. So the quality of childcare that we're delivering inevitably deteriorates. So we need increased funding for providers, but we also need to make it really affordable for every family, particularly for low income families.
International examples that you've noticed?
I don't think there's a perfect example anywhere. We know the Scandinavian countries do better. I think even if you had the perfect model in place, this is about cultural change. This is about moving on from gendered norms, but it is also about a government valuing. I believe it's the most important job. Looking after small children, babies, should be the most important role. And those people are underpaid, as we know. The providers are underfunded. So it's about what is important for you as a country, and how do you move on cultural and gendered norms.
Anna, international examples that you've noticed that you'd like to shout about?
Yeah, following on from Jolie, I think that's the structural side of it utterly is there. From my side, it sort of swings and roundabouts, because I think Toyota in the States has a Bright Horizons nursery attached to their factory. So, for example, you look at that and you think that's great, because I think we were talking about the lack of flexible childcare. I don't see a world where we're going to magically conjure up overnight nurseries and an ability to last minute paper over those childcare cracks for low income families who need to work quickly and fast, at the jump of a hat in terms of those factory jobs, perhaps. But Then the other side of that coin is places like, I think it was PwC, who had a childcare facility within their offices. Two sides of that coin is, one facilitates shift workers needing flexible childcare at Toyota. PwC was about basically working women into the ground, because if you have your child there, you don't leave, so they get more bang for their buck. So I think there's interesting pockets of what individual public sector, private sector businesses are doing. But no, there's no magic formula here. But there's definite movement and inspiration we can take from outside of the UK, where it is utterly on its knees.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really interesting about having a childcare provision at work. I mean, we've actually had a question from somebody in the audience saying, why don't more companies do this? And I suppose, yes, it is expensive to set up. It's a different activity for a company to suddenly get a childcare provider in, but look at the problems that we have with the amount of excess office space as a result of flexible working, the pandemic, the property industry, older buildings not being refurbished. I mean, this is something that maybe companies should be looking at again if
But
they've got
also
surplus space.
the psychology of being able to see your child on your lunch break, there's a human element to this as well, I think. Yeah, it's just, I think more companies, if they can, should be looking at that as an option. And I think the word here is choice. Is not going, you have to be strapped to your desk and your child in, the company nursery. But if you give people a choice, I think you will ultimately triumph.
Okay, a choice is what we like to hear about. Now, we are running out of time for our session today, but I'm conscious that we have spoken a lot about the negatives of childhood, of childcare, of motherhood. That's an unfortunate thing to happen because it is International Women's Day. We do want to be positive, but every year we are continually talking about the struggle that women face. It's important that we keep talking about it, because if we stop talking about it, we're never going to solve any of these problems. But nevertheless, I want to leave you on a positive note. So I've selected this question from an audience member who reiterates what I said. The costs and the challenges of childcare are one that many women and couples are facing. But how can we create a more optimistic future for the next generation? So, panel, who would like to go first in giving me some optimism?
Oh,
So weary.
Dig deep, dig deep.
Come on. I mean, the good thing that we've seen since 2020 is more people working remotely. And we know that remote working has huge benefits, particularly for mothers. There's loads of research to support that now. But as Anna said, we're now seeing a rollback in remote working from the likes of Alan Sugar and James Dyson, who seem to be spuriously claiming that it's bad for productivity. So we need to shut the mouths of those people and really focus on better flexible working and remote working. But as well as that, I from having conversations with ministers and with MPs, I'm seeing a complete narrative change in the way we talk about childcare and parental leave. So I think the future is bright, and we're on a journey now to getting to a place where we have better legislation for parents.
And for all of our critiques of the government's flagship childcare reforms, it is amazing on many levels that they have decided to do this, to give £4 billion to trying to make the system better. I mean, it's a start.
It's a start. I mean, I used to talk about childcare 5 years ago to MPs and ministers, and they'd look at me like I had 2 chocolate fingers stuck up my nose. It was just absolute nonsense to them. Why would we care about this? And now we're seeing it's the battleground of the next election. It's been talked about in a way where it benefits the economy. This is completely different to where we were 5 years ago. And yes, the system is still not perfect. That 4.1 billion is probably being spent quite badly, but we are seeing progression, and we should be pleased with that progression, I think.
So worth investing in. Micah, what are your positives that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, my positives are quite similar, that the conversations have moved on so far, and that we have people like these 2 powerhouses fighting the good fight, and it's in the government's crosshairs. So things have moved on a lot, but these are deep structural issues that aren't going to change overnight. We know that. And these things aren't always within our control as much as we want it to be. What is within our control is the decisions we make with regards to our long-term financial resilience, getting engaged with our pension, talking to our partner about money. If we are working for ourselves, which a lot of women are doing, putting something away in a lifetime ISA or the right vehicle, and really becoming investors. Women need to see themselves as investors, not just as savers, not just as providers, but really wrapping their arms around their own financial resilience. Because if we take care of ourselves, we can take care of the next generation. And nothing bad happens when women have more money. It's a game changer for their families, for society, and for the economy. So to me, that's the key takeaway in all of this.
Okay, well, before we go to Anna, I'll throw in my positive for today. So the front page of the Financial Times today is a story about a £2.9 billion deal nationwide going to acquire Virgin Bank. That deal was done by a female banker, Debbie Crosby, who's the chief executive of Nationwide. How fantastic for International Women's Day that we have a big deal done by somebody who happens to be a woman running a bank on our front page, because I think that's what we need. We need to see women represented at the highest levels of the city, the highest levels of society, showing the blokes how it's done. And that was a really great example for me of how we are seeing change, and that is something that I personally feel positive about. Plus, it was in the pink paper. But Anna, what's keeping you happy this International Women's Day? Cheer us all up.
I think you're right. We need to celebrate these, they're not even incremental steps. These are big seismic moments. And I think it's important to have the two sides of the iceberg, the bit that we see and the bit that's weighing us down. Following on with what Jolie said, I think one of my favourite moments of 2024 so far was writing a piece where I spoke about the titans of business like Lord Sugar, Sir Dyson, and at the end I said, I think there's just going to be a point where Lord Dyson is just going to have to suck it up. And I think that is probably my optimism. Is I don't think it's about asking, please, sir, can we have flexible working? Can you change things? I think it's people are going to be voting with their feet. And I think we are looking towards a future that was the past. The working world was bulldozed in COVID. We were looking at the embers of that. The building blocks were all over it. And we as women are rebuilding it one breeze block at a time with our bare hands. And it's going to be a different world. It's going to be a different structure. And I was saying for our girls, but Jolie's got boys, but for our boys too, for parents, for people.
And for women from across all income groups, across all spectrums, all backgrounds, all of the different groups and voices that we've had reflected in our panel today, thanks to your amazing questions that have come in. So we're going to have to wrap now, but it's down to me to say thank you to our amazing panel, Jolie, Annie, Anna and Micah. Great that you could join us today, and thanks to you for joining us and everyone who shared their views and submitted questions. I promise that we will all keep campaigning for change long after International Women's Day is over. And finally, thanks to Amy Alam and the FT's Financial Literacy and Inclusion campaign. They're the ones who've made today's free event possible, so please share it with as many women and men in your life as possible. I might also try and find an email address for Sir James Dyson. Now, to find out more about our mission, you can visit the charity's website, ftflic.com. Hear more about the curriculum that we're trying to get into secondary schools at the moment, because of course financial education is a bigger part of solving many of the problems that we've talked about today. You can follow FTFlic on social media at FT_Flick on Instagram or at FlickTok_ on TikTok. So please go forth and be financially fearless.